freedom of the press. On behalf of the Commission, may I ask Commissioner Breton to take the floor?
Thank you, President. Honourable members of the Parliament. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to take part in today's debate on the extradition and prosecution of Julian Assange and implications on freedom of press. Freedom of expression, as well as the right to information, are fundamental rights of every human being and remain essential foundation for democracy. The EU remains a staunch supporter of these rights and of the importance of a free and independent press. Freedom of expression is also a right that carries with its special duties and responsibilities. Limitation of this right can be imposed by states in accordance with their national legislation and international human rights obligations, in full respect of the principle of necessity and proportionality. This delicate balance, including between the protection of national security and the right of the public to be informed about potential threats to the public interest, is a matter for courts to assess. Any individual, including Julian Assange, must be given the opportunity to challenge restriction of his rights, including to freedom of expression, by the competent judicial authorities. A court in the United Kingdom is currently hearing Julian Assange's case on his extradition to the US. The EU follows the judicial proceedings and does not comment on the ongoing court case. Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Breton. The next speaker is Mr. Pospisil.
Děkuji pěkně, paní předsedající.
Thank you, Madam President. I will pick up on what the Commissioner said. This is a very important case. There are a number of public interests at cross purposes. There is the right of the public to be informed. There is the right to the freedom of expression. On the other hand, there is also the obligation of the state to protect the law and the respect for law and the legal order. The situation concerning Assange is delicate. We should trust in the legal system of the United Kingdom, which is there's a rule of law, and we should follow the proceedings which will finally decide about extradition, potential extradition, and we should respect the independence of the judiciary. And we should not be involved in the decision itself. As the Commissioner said, we should be vigilant, but we should not try to influence the court proceedings. That is not up to us. We often debate rule of law in the member states, and we have to say, if the court in the UK makes a decision, it may not be final. Assange can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. If he does so, it can review the case. So I would, with respect to the complexity of the case, I would be careful.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Prglej.
Predsedujoča, hvala za besedo. Spoštovani komisar, kolegice in kolegi.
Thank you very much for the floor. I thank you very much for this plenary discussion on the extradition of Julian Assange. despite the late hour, this needs to wake up our public, because this is important for the human rights of all of us. I certainly hope that, in line with the highest levels of international standards, the decision about Julian Assange will be made in the UK before this case makes it to the ECHR, because waiting for that decision after the primary decision had already been made could have consequences that could be left unmitigated. There are obvious double standards at play here, and this would mean that our criticism of human rights violations around the world would also be something that would fall under criticism. There is no power in the world that would be completely immune to the possibility of breaching human rights. Yesterday we made an important step forward by improving the protection of journalists with unfounded slap suits. This is important for the public and for all of the Assanges of this world who are protecting the interests of the public. Thank you.
Intervenire l'onorevole Grigorova.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Gregorova.
Dear colleagues, Commissioner, Mr. Shipton, Julian Assange, a candidate for the 2022 Sakharov Prize, brought to light documents revealing cases of war crimes and human rights violations. For this effort, Julian has received recognition from numerous organizations advocating for freedom of speech. A couple of hours ago, in this plenary, we have mourned the unjust treatment and death of a man who stood against the authority of power, man who received 2021 Sakharov Prize and who brought to light abuse of power and corruption. Alexei has also received recognition from freedom fighters across the world. Why am I speaking about both of them? Because we acknowledge with one of them that a person can be a symbol, regardless of their mistakes or disagreements we might have. A symbol of fight against injustice, oppression, corruption, of David standing up to Goliath, not afraid of the consequences. We condemn consequences for one of them. I stand before you to also voice my unwavering support to what Julian Assange's work represents. The right of citizens to be protected against the state's abuse of power, to be informed, and the right for journalists as well as individuals to expose such abuse and not fear punishment. You don't get to pick your favorite whistleblower. You either stand with all of them or none at all. Thank you.
Grazie. Onorevole Beck.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Beck.
Thank you very much. Bereits 2007.
In 2017, after the murder of a Maltese investigative journalist, this parliament demanded more legal protection for journalists and whistleblowers. However, right now you can turn your words into deeds. And Julian Assange, who brought the war crimes committed in Iraq into the daylight, he is being threatened with 175 years in prison because of questionable accusations of spying. And already our party has voted to offer Assange asylum in the EU, someone who's finally deserves asylum. And this morning we offered our condolences to the widow of Mrs. Navalny. You should act before it's too late. You should act before Assange ends up in the hands of the United States, before he has the same fate as Navalny.
Prego.
Mr. Pimenta Lopes.
Obrigado, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you, President. I want to pay tribute to John Shipton, who is here in the gallery on behalf of Julian Assange, listening to this debate. Now, there has been a request by the US to extradite Julian Assange. We'll have a decision in the coming days. But the EU is silent. And the EU must speak out against the extradition, as various governments have done, as the UN envoy against torture has done, as many have said. his life, his physical integrity is at risk, and there is a real threat to pluralism and to freedom with what's happening. This silence is hypocrisy, because you say you're in favour of freedom of expression and journalism, but you consign this to oblivion when someone reveals war crimes, as Mr. Assange did. I call for the immediate freedom of Mr. Assange now.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Ms. Pignedoli.
Qual è il reato commesso da Assange?
What is really at stake here? I was at the High Court in London, and the counsel there say that what has been done is that he has been behind the publication of documents of public interest which indicate crimes. Journalists in the past have published confidential information, but Assange is the only one who's in a high security prison as a result. Many citizens have lost their lives. They've been subject to extradition and to rendition, and these are the sorts of things that Assange has reported. Clearly his detention is political. Clearly one has to fear that any journalist in America would suffer the exact same fate. The European institutions are always talking about freedom of expression and freedom of speech, but we have done nothing to protect Assange. So it's high time we did stand up for the freedom of expression that citizens deserve. Many citizens are doing this before the courts in London, and the institutions must demand his immediate release. Thank you. Mr. Sonneborn.
Verzeihung, ich war noch in einer.
I'm sorry, I was in a cafe. If the EU hasn't said anything to Assange in 13 years, it's actually the clearest message they ever sent, because this is only superficially about Assange. We're talking about the rule of law and freedom and the freedom of expression, and we're talking about war crimes. It's talking about suppressing critical journalism and the destruction of citizens' freedoms. With Assange, it either stands or falls, this principle of freedom of the press and democracy. If the same EU who has said that they want to have long-term studies on plastic lids to milk bottles, if they haven't said anything about Assange in 13 years, then they can clearly demonstrate what kind of a society, what kind of values does the EU stand. And please, your freedom is not being defended on the Hindu Kush. It's being defended in a very tiny cell in the UK. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Giarrusso is the next speaker. Julian Assange is a martyr for the cause of freedom. He is a man who has been imprisoned for 12 years he hasn't been convicted. He has been imprisoned. He can't see his family, his wife, his children, his father, and he has not been convicted. As I say, he's somebody who has been battling for a cause, and there are people who are fighting the cause of liberty, pluralism, freedom of expression, who are calling for his release. Surely we need to recognise the veracity of what they're saying. We should be protecting all individuals, especially when they're telling the truth about what happened in situations where war crimes were perpetrated and people died. If he isn't freed, then Julian Assange could die in prison, and we will not be able to obtain freedom of information without journalists such as him. We have to defend him, to defend our principles, and to defend ourselves. So I and many others will be with his wife in this terrible battle for his freedom. All heads of government, all citizens, all governments ought to be standing with me, with us, to fight for Julian Assange. Until he is free, Europe will not be free. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have Catch the Eye now. We've got a few colleagues wishing to take the floor. The first being Mr. Polchak.
Děkuji, paní předsedkyně. Já mám respekt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I respect to what Julian Assange did. I also understand that to be in prison for 12 years, that is very sad. That's a punishment high enough. I also understand the initiatives of my colleagues. However, I'd like to say that we should step back because we are talking about the British legal system. We are talking about the rule of law. And I believe that we shouldn't politicize the topic as such. Mr. Assange has legal guarantees that are given by the British system and also by the European Court of Human Rights, to which he can turn to. I think it is important to have media freedom. It is not a black and white case. There are also positive symbols left by Mr. Assange, but we need to step back a little bit and we need to trust the British system. Thank you.
Thank you. Zarena?
Je tiens tout d'abord à saluer le père de Julian Assange.
I want to pay tribute to Julian Assange's father, John Shipton, who is here with us today. Thank you for being here. If the US gets what it wants, if Assange is sent over there, it will be allowing the White House to stop all journalists in their tracks, all whistleblowers, and then they will all disappear in the US carceral system. These espionage claims are a way of suffocating journalism and freedom of expression. This potential extradition decision is really dangerous. It's dangerous for Julian Assange, but it's dangerous for our fundamental freedoms throughout the world. We therefore must leave no diplomatic stone unturned. We must work with the US and the UK so that this doesn't happen, so that there is no extradition, so that there is freedom for Julian Assange and all whistleblowers.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to add my voice of support to the campaign against the extradition of Julian Assange. I have very little faith in the quality of US justice. However, I want to focus on the second part of this debate, the implications on freedom of the press, because some of the sponsors of this debate are themselves no strangers to attacks on the press. One of the Irish parties of the left, Sinn Féin, identified that the extradition of Mr. Assange is an attempt to suppress journalism, but this is the same party that was accused just a few weeks ago of deliberately targeting the media. According to a letter signed by the National Union of Journalists, PEN International and Reporters Without Borders, the number of legal actions that have been filed by Sinn Féin members points to a coordinated campaign against the media in Ireland. According to Index on Censorship, a UK-based watchdog, we are not aware of members of any other Irish party taking a comparable number of concurrent cases against the media in recent years. The other Irish MEPs in the left have a bit of form when it comes to suing media outlets as well. What we need is an honest debate about media.
Thank you very much. We're talking about protecting whistleblowers. We have EU legislation to ensure that whistleblowers are actually the emergency brakes in our democracy. Our freedom of expression and our safety also have to be balanced. If something's illegal, it has to be prosecuted, and the EU's legislation protects our whistleblowers, and that's why we have courts to ensure that. But we should also be clear that we have a geopolitical need to have better protection of whistleblowers in the EU. We can't live with the fact that whistleblowers who act on behalf of democracy for truth and justice, that they fall in the hands of Putin's Russia. We have to protect them better after they have been in front of the courts, so that the whistleblowers, for example, don't commit suicide, even though they've been heroes for our democracy and heroes for the truth.
Thank you. And may I now ask Commissioner Breton to reply to the debate.
Madam President, honourable members, Thank you for your intervention. The Commission has taken good note of them. I can only repeat what I said in my introduction. We all agree that freedom of expression and free and independent press are essential in any democratic society. As mentioned, a court in the United Kingdom is currently hearing Julian Assange extradition case. We do not comment on the ongoing judicial proceedings. Thank you.
Grazie, grazie mille.
Thank you very much indeed, Commissioner Breton. That brings to a conclusion this debate.